Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel, and happy Father's Day to all the fathers that are out there, and all the mothers that have supported the fathers when they might not ordinarily. But today is your day, and for us grandfathers, happy Grandfather's Day, right, Alex? So we're a couple of grandfathers. And before we get into the show, I've got to show you the present that one of my granddaughters gave me. It's the shirt I have on, but the interesting part is, if I can stand up and go back, ta-da! Can you read that?
Mm-hmm.
No?
Yeah.
Okay. By the way, I hate cats. No, I don't really hate cats. We have 3 cats. So as the process that Alex has established, I'm going to present the calendar, make a couple of comments. Present now. Classic tab. Window. Let's see if we can do this. Okay, there's our calendar. And tonight we have Adam Block. I'll give a little introductory remarks for Adam in just a moment. Next week, Frank was going to come on and give us a little bit of intro on to Graxpert. And if you haven't heard about Graxpert, it's a new way to get rid of gradients, which a lot of people are excited about. A week after that, Ivo is going to be here on focusing, and then a woman from the Space Telescope Science Institute is going to be here to tell us all about the art of visualization of web imagery, and we've all admired those images. John's going to be on next. Sid after that. Yazo is going to tell us about his team. They have a great team. And then Rod's going to, and so on and so on. Rod's going to tell us about his new observatory. And then we have an opening on August 13th. And if you're interested in filling that opening, just let us know. And I'm going to now stop sharing. Stop presenting. Okay, we're back. I don't think there's many more introductions to be made. Let's see, Frank, intro to Adam. Tonight we have Adam Block, and he's going to present us on a subject that I think we have all struggled with one way or another, and that is stretching. How do you stretch these images to maintain your star color, to get the nebulas out, to get everything just right? And no matter how many images I have done, and I don't know about people out there, we always struggle with stretching. So Adam's going to give us some hints and some ideas, and I'm sure that we're all going to learn from us. So everyone out there, I hope you appreciate that. And Adam, if you're ready, take it away. It's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Eric. I appreciate that. And let me just extend my thanks to the Astro Imaging channel for giving me another opportunity to spend some time here and show people what I hope is useful and interesting information. Since you mentioned something about upcoming, the visualization of astronomical imaging, I'm going to go totally off script here and just mention something else that I've done that viewers of this channel may be interested in, because it's something that I covered previously on this channel, but I have a very nice presentation now that I did recently for a group of people live, and it was about the interpretation of astronomical images, the beauty, the compelling nature of the night sky. So I just want to point out that on my YouTube channel, there is a new video, if you haven't seen it before. I call it Ancient Echoes of a Forgotten Sky. It's kind of an update to something that I've done on this very channel previously. Some viewers might be interested in that. So I'm not sharing my screen, so that means you didn't see anything. Let me do that again by sharing my screen. Is that what you were about to tell me, I hope? Do that again. So can you guys see my screen right now?
And remember, Adam, it always takes us a few seconds to get back to you.
Understood. Thank you. So this is the video that's on my YouTube channel. I just wanted to point that out because it's something that I've done previously. So now I will go to PixInsight and talk about what I wanted to cover tonight, which is stretching. As Eric mentioned, stretching is, I think, one of the most important aspects or elements of image processing, because among all of the things that we do, very few things actually make concrete the decisions that you make when you do the thing, whatever it is you're going to do. There's really no reversibility in this. Once you make that decision to stretch your image to display the values of the data in a very particular way, you really have consequences of that. How easy or difficult it might be to blend in color, how easy or difficult it might be to see details or other elements of an image that you might feel are important. This is one of the things that, we often say that you can give an example data set to someone and then give it to another person, they're going to come up with a completely different result. This is one of the reasons why. It is the choice in stretching the image that really is one of the very first decisions that's made that determines kind of the look and feel of what an image ultimately will be expressed as. So in this presentation, I'm going to show you some elements of stretching. Recently, I've given this a lot of thought. So on my site, I have created a set of videos called Stretch Academy. And in that set of videos, I go into depth about many of the elements that just go into stretching. I have found it surprising that this is something that actually hasn't been covered. It is fundamental to astronomical image processing, but no one actually has an entire discussion, if you will, or focused kind of instructional content just on stretching images. Because of its importance, everyone appreciates it, but no one's really ever done it. So this was, I think, a very good idea to sit down and think, deeply about stretching of images. What's it coming from? How do you make the decisions? How do you know you might be doing it right or when you might be kind of boxing yourself in a corner? That's the idea here. And I'm going to begin this presentation with some very fundamental things that I think most people know about. I'm going to be showing and demonstrating things in PixInsight. I do think that unlike some other things that you talk about that are more mathematical, the nice thing about stretching images, it's very visual. So I hope that you'll think this is kind of a fun presentation rather than the more dry ones that sometimes you can get into whenever you open up PixInsight. A lot of numbers and parameters, but one of the things about stretching is it really has this visual feedback component to things. And I think you'll enjoy that. So there is nuance to it, and I do think, for example, there are now some great tools, and I'm going to be showing this as well. One of those tools is something called GHS, the Generalized Hyperbolic Stretch, and so I'll be demonstrating a little bit about that as well. But ultimately, in an hour, I just can't show you everything. So just to give you a sense, I'm not trying to advertise, but I just want you to see how large the parameter space is for this discussion. These are all of this, there's more than 7 hours of material here. These are all the different kinds of areas that you can dive into with regards to stretching. There are certain things that deal with narrowband imaging and stretching, other things that you might not have explored before. So it's that kind of thought that I've given to this particular subject, and I hope you enjoy some of the ideas. So, as I say, I'm going to begin from the very beginning, which is the visualization of the data. Stretching the image on the screen is a form of a stretch, but that stretch is one that isn't permanent. It's just for our purposes so that we can better see the information that is contained in the image. Otherwise, it's hard for us to make a decision at all. If we have the image, I have an image here being displayed just like this, that would be very difficult to work with. Now I'm going to begin instead of with a color image, which has additional information. Let me just start with a grayscale image. And what I'd like to talk about is the screen transfer function that allows us to visualize the information. So to do that, we need to kind of understand the layout of the tool here and what it's actually purporting to do. What it does is it maps the values that are in our image to values that are being displayed on a screen. And what is never said is that the screen representation of the information is, of course, much more limited in general than the amount of data that we have in an image that we can see at any one time. So we have to choose how to visualize this information. The camera that I was using to collect the data here that you see in this image, it's a 16-bit camera. That means that there are 65,000 discrete brightness levels in this image. But on your monitor, as you're looking at the screen right now, you can only see 256 brightness levels. And those, of course, are the ones that we get to work with on the screen. So this tool, what it could do, what the STF could say when we see this gradient, the gradient here goes from black to white when we're talking about a grayscale image, and that is the representation of the data, which goes between 0 and 1. PixInsight works in the normalized 0 to 1 value space. But it is also mapping, therefore, values that on the screen go from 0 to 255. So if we were to modify the screen transfer function in a way that almost makes sense, we could label the bottom axis as going between 0 and 1 for the data and 0 and 255 grayscales for the information. And what that means is when I put my cursor here on the screen and I have a value, there is a nebula in this picture. I haven't told you that. You might be able to tell by the title here, but the nebulosity is completely filling this field. You don't see it right now because it's not being displayed. The value here as I roll the cursor across the screen is roughly 0.005. So it has a number. But what's 0.005 up here? Where does that exist? 0.005 up here is somewhere very close to this left edge because this goes between 0 and 1. And that means that the useful information, the information that we're interested in seeing, the nebula, is currently being shown on the screen as black because that value, 0.005, is being mapped to 0 or something very close to 0, very nearly black. So these carets then take on a meaning. The carets are the little triangles here. The rightmost caret is the white point, the middle is the midtones value, and the leftmost caret is the black point. We can manipulate these to change how the image appears on the screen. I will, for example, take the midtone slider here, and it is currently interacting with this image because I got that little check mark, and I can slide it to the left, and you'll notice that the image gets brighter. In fact, it'll also get brighter if I just take this, the white point, and slide it to the left. The image will get brighter, but in a slightly different way. So the way that most people do it or understand what to do is to take the middle one here and go all the way to the left at some point as far as they can, and they'll start to see the nebulosity. There is an automatic way of doing the same thing, which is to, everyone knows this, to press this little nuclear button. And then suddenly, oh my gosh, you have something on the screen, and it has taken that slider, the midtone slider, and moved it pretty far to the left. So far, in fact, because it's so close to the left edge that it almost looks as if there is a single caret here on the screen. So one of the things that I try to get people to do when they want to start off in PixInsight is make life easy on themselves. I've seen that people struggle with this tool, not only in understanding what they're looking at, but just literally manipulating the values. Right now, it would be very difficult for me to manipulate the midtones value and the black point because they look like they're right on top of one another. Yes, you can zoom in. One way to zoom in is you roll I'm rolling my mouse wheel here to zoom in and out. The other way to do it is to press the little zoom button here, and you can click on the screen. Again, that zooms in and out. That also explains why the brightness level here of this bar is changing. The gradient changes as I zoom in because I'm actually looking at a zoomed in portion. I'm zooming in between these two carets, which is in the black area of the gradient. If I zoom back out here, you can see between those two carets is the very dark area right there. So this is giving us all kinds of information, but it's very difficult to manipulate. So one of the first stretches that I ask people to do is to literally stretch, let's just put this back here, is to literally stretch the window itself. Stretch it all the way across the screen. And when you do that, you'll find now over here on the side, it is much easier to see those carets and manipulate them. You can get at them. It's easier to press the button to zoom in and out of them. So that's the first stretch that I do. I say, do the screen stretch of the screen stretch, and it'll make it easier to work with. So now you have an appreciation of a little bit of what's going on there. Let's go ahead and do what everyone, again, already knows how to do, which is the automatic screen stretch. And you can see what's being chosen here. We can see something that should be pretty obvious. It is that values here on the screen are not entirely black. And that should, of course, be true, because you'll notice the black point is not all the way to the left side. That's where 0 value is. So the values being displayed here for a grayscale are brighter than 0. And how bright are they? Well, we know this value here, as I said before, it hasn't changed no matter what we do with the screen stretch. These values are still the same, so it's still 0.05. That means that I know that this value right here must be equal to or greater than 0.005. If that were not true, it would be, being displayed as something much darker or black on the screen. So if I want to make things darker on the screen, all I need to do is move the black point slider to the right, and then I'll be saying, okay, now I want 0.005 to look like it's dark on the screen. So I manipulate the black point. In the same way, if I zoom all the way out here, I'm going to zoom out with my mouse because I don't like using that thing. If I zoom all the way out and I manipulate the white point slider, we can change what things are being called white in this picture. We can make more and more things white just by sliding this over to the right. One more thing I'd like to point out is that if I reset this, why is it that all that's happening? The reason all of that is happening is because when I take the midtone slider and I move it to the left here, now I'm just doing it manually. Well, what I'm really doing is I'm assigning all of the values that go between 0 and 128 on the screen, which is the midtone 0.5 grayscale, mid grayscale. I'm assigning all of those values to the smaller region of what would be kind of interesting in the picture. And the more I encompass that range of interesting information, the more of that nebulosity is being assigned all of the grayscales. And then everything to the right of the midtones value, that gets all the other grayscales that are greater than the mid-gray value, the half value. And that means that everything brighter than mid-gray is going to be very similar to one another, because there are less values, if you will, that are being assigned those brighter values for all of the other parts of the image. That's why the stars look bright and become bigger and so on, because they have values that are much greater than this midtone value that I've set here. That's the idea behind the screen stretch. So once we have a screen stretch, of course, we are going to ultimately choose the level to which we want the image to appear. Just because we press this nuclear button does not mean that this stretch is the best stretch for the object, or it's somehow best in terms of minimizing the appearance of artifacts or gradients. It is just a mathematical computation that takes place. It's based on the histogram of the image. Now, it's a very good average kind of visualization. It gets you to be able to see typically very faint things that are perhaps only as bright as the sky values. So the histogram computation that's done by pressing the nuclear button is very useful, but it's not necessarily best in any sense of, I'm going to stretch the image and I'm just going to press the nuclear button and then I'm going to go on my way. Manipulating these carets to make the image really appear as you want is part of the process of stretching. Now, the stretching that I'm doing here is synonymous with another tool, which is the histogram transformation tool, which I'll bring up here. So H, Adam, H. Histogram transformation does exactly and precisely the same things that I am doing here. When I press the real-time preview here, and then I manipulate, and I'm going to turn off the I'm going to turn off my screen stretch of the, of the actual object here. So I'm not seeing the screen stretch when I use my real-time preview. When I manipulate here, these carets, just like I was doing with the STF tool, it's precisely the same. There is no difference. You know what there are a couple of differences though, between using the STF thing and then using here, the real-time preview. Well, one thing is the real-time preview does not have, in combination with the histogram transformation process, it doesn't have a cool little automatic choice of that calculation of the nuclear button. It doesn't have that. It's kind of just this manual thing. I actually think specifically for histogram transformation, you could almost do away with this extra process and just put the nuclear button over here, specifically when you bring up histogram transformation, and then you have this basically the same functionality as the STF tool, because everything else is basically here. You can manipulate these values, you can see the histogram, you can look at the individual channels and so on. So what we're doing when we do a permanent stretch is we take whatever the values are that we have determined here, and now I'm determined them in a screen stretch way, but we take these values and we drag them down to here, and then in doing so, we can perform the actual stretch that we might want on the image. If I perform this stretch on this image here, we will have it appear just, and then I turn off my screen stretch, we'll have it appear just as we might have wanted it if this was the best that we were interested in getting. Okay, so that was just the fundamentals of the STF process and how it kind of relates to histogram transformation. There is another element to it that I want to point out, and this does deal with a color image. So let me, we have the color image here. I'm going to minimize this for a moment and just again work with the screen transfer function here. I'm going to do an auto STF on the color version of this data, and we're going to get a very typical result. The result is that it looks like, you don't see the nebula, it's there, but it looks like this overly biased color image. It has, in this case, a pedestal value in blue. So the image looks overly blue. Many times people get a green answer, but it doesn't have to be green. It can be any color of the rainbow. In this case, it's blue. So what we want to do in order to visualize the information is we want to have the biases, that is the pedestal values for each of the color channels, to be relatively equal to one another, neutral, that will make them appear gray in our image, and then we can see everything else that might be going on. To do that, then we can unlink, and this only applies to color images, but we can unlink this and then apply the auto stretch to each of the channels independently. And then, of course, we can see the object, because this is actually doing that job of aligning those the histograms up, basically. I guess I can show that to you here. If I do let me see if I can do this all in one go here. If we do this without the stretch, let's see, if I go like this, is that going to show me? Yes. You can see that these are now aligned. If I did it like this, and then I bring these down here, I think we will see that the histograms, I don't see, now I'm not going to be able to do that, but you would be able to see that the histograms are not aligned rather than being nicely aligned as I showed. So one of the interesting things that I'd like to point out, however, is that when you transfer these functions down, there's something that often confuses people. So let me reset this here, and let me just demonstrate this. If I unlink, right? So these guys are unlinked. I do this, I get my nice nebula picture here. You saw me earlier with a grayscale image. I drag the values down to histogram transformation like this, and the values show up right here in these boxes. Now, you don't need to see in detail anything here other than the fact that the values did not seem to get transferred. There is no change in these numbers when I did this. When I drag that here, obviously the image is being stretched, and so I know that these values should be transferred here, but we don't see a change. Why? Why? Well, the answer is because when we drag these three different things down, they are affecting each of the channels differently. So this, what we're looking at here is effectively just the K channel, if you will, which isn't the channel. I mean, what would we say if we have different values here of red, green, or blue? They're literally different values. So we couldn't put just one value here. What we need to do is look at each of the channels individually. And then you can see that they are populated with each of the values that are showing up here in the STF. That confuses people. Sometimes the default, when they have it clicked here with the RGBK, they drag the values down and they wonder, why isn't this changing? And that's the reason why. One other thing I'd like to point out, which is something that often confuses people as well, or maybe makes it harder to use the STF tool, is that when you have a color image like this, you saw that when I have a linked example, we have this blue mess. And then when I unlink it, we have the nice nebula picture, right? Because it's performing the stretch individually on each of the channels. That's great. But now, what if I want to make this image brighter or dimmer? I think that people have probably found this, that when they go, drag the midtone slider of one of these channels, it messes up the color balance. You don't want that. So what the trick is, what you want to do if you want to adjust the brightness of the image when you are unlinked, is you first unlink the image, press the auto stretch. So now you've optimized this for each color channel, but then you can link it back again. And in linking it back, you'll see that as I grab the midtone slider, I'm now moving all of the channels in coordination with one another. So if I want to raise the black level, I can make the image darker, but it does it to each of the channels at the same time. That's the trick. So first you do it unlinked, and then you link them just so you can manipulate the image if you want. This also, by the way, if you unlink it, if you did truly want to do some kind of color balance adjustment, this would be a more advanced thing, but you could do that as well just by manipulating the slider in the appropriate channel that you want. And then you could transfer these values on over to histogram transformation, or you could do the same thing within histogram transformation. But I'm just demonstrating the use of the auto STF to get you close, unlinked, and then you can, of course, manipulate as you might like together in coordination. Okay, so I'm looking at where I should be right now. I think I said everything. I'm going to now pause for one moment concerning the STF and its relationship to histogram transformation, but specifically with this in general. Are there any questions about this before I move on to working? Actually, I'll just work with this image a little bit and show you some more interesting things about stretching.
Adam, so far we haven't gotten any questions from everybody's just sitting here and rapt paying attention to you.
Okay, well, let's continue and do some more exciting things. That was just foundational stuff. That's just, I think, things that most people know, but let's continue with what you would do with an image like this. So this is just an RGB image. As you see, it has not been color calibrated. And the next thing that you typically do with an image like this, you can see there are some gradients in this image. This image is not, perfectly smooth in terms of gradients or anything like that. So you would do something like DBE. And this is another important part of stretching. It is the identification of useful information. That is a skill. And it's not something that I think people are often in tune with. And so let me try to express that a little more in depth here. This image is filled with nebulosity. And people, I think they are somehow afraid when they use DBE here to remove gradients in the image. They're afraid to put samples anywhere because they know that if I brighten up this image, if I just make this image much brighter, let's see if I can do that. You can tell there's nebula everywhere in this image, right? I mean, there's pink and red and stuff everywhere. Where am I going to click in this image that's safe? There's no safe place. That's not true. Not if you think about it in a different way. The way that I would approach it, and this applies to stretching as well, because ultimately you're going to say what's worthy of being shown and not being shown, is that there is some amount of information that you're just going to have to say, you know what, this is not useful information because I don't have enough signal. It's just simply too noisy. Yes, I can see it in the data, I can see it's in the image. My brain is really good at doing this. Eye and brain. I can see the faint wisp. I can see this. I can see that. I can see the comet's tail going across the frame. But you just simply did not earn the right to display it. You need to make that choice. There's a tolerance. There's a threshold at which you're going to say, you know, everything below this level, I just simply don't have the data for. I can see it, but I'm going to choose not to display it. Or if I choose to display it, I understand that what comes along with it is a lot of, you know, manipulation. Typically, it requires some over-processing to try to make it look good. The same thing applies here, just with DBE in a very simple form. I'm going to click on regions, not that doesn't have nebulosity, but that has signal that I ultimately know at the end of the day, it's just not going to be useful information. It is below a threshold. I can call it neutral sky because I just haven't detected that signal well enough. So I could click on a region like this and then go around and, you know, look at other parts of the image. What I should do, though, is set these numbers here. So this is, let me remove that thing. Let me set my my tolerance here to 10, and let's set this to, well, it doesn't matter. 3 is fine. Let's make a big enough sample size. We'll make it 20. There. Now I can click. So I'm going to click right there. Perfect. As long as I don't have a star in my sample, I'm going to click right here. I'm going to come over here. See how it's dark? It's kind of dark. No stars. Perfect. See how careful I am about doing this? Not very careful at all, right? I'm going to click there. I'm going to come down here. Now, I know there's pink. I know it. But in this dark region, I know this is going to be a dark bit of nebulosity. I can click there because in terms of useful information, there isn't that much. And this will take care of the color gradient that's going across the frame. Again, I can click over here. It's a relatively dark spot. This is a dark spot. We could even argue that this is a dark spot. You know, whatever. There. I clicked. And I could maybe even do one more over here. Fine. So this would be, I'll do subtraction. I'll say replace. This might be my result. People are very concerned about clicking. But it's the idea that there is a certain degree of useful information in an image that can help you, not only with stretching, but other processing, such as just simply picking areas for samples for DBE. So now I'm going to do, let's continue to do an unlinked stretch here. You can see that we are not color calibrated. The colors are goofy, but I did remove the basic gradient in the image, right? I don't see green up here and somehow red down there. I see a color everywhere, but not color calibrated. So now we'll do our color calibration with SPCC. This chip that was being used, this is from Telescope Live, the data. So this is not exactly the chip, but it is one of the CCD chips. And the Astrodon filters would be a good choice. I'm going to select a region that to be my neutral sky, and it has a similar kind of thought process where I might go, I'm thinking like right here would be pretty good, just where there are stars, not much in the way of nebulosity. So something like there would be good. This will be for my background neutralization. I put down here. And this image should have the astrometric solution, so I just should need to do that. Image has no valid astrometric solution. Did I forget to do that? I don't know. Does this image have the valid extras? I hate, see, this is what happens when you do it live. I can't remember. Probably because when I saved the file, I didn't save the astrometric solution. It's okay, we can just do it, but I swear it had one. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Let's do it. Let's find an astrometric solution because I guess I just don't have one. I don't, this can't imagine. Yeah, that doesn't have anything. All right, fine. I don't remember the plate scale though. I'll just have to guess. So what are we doing? We're going to go to image analysis, image solver, and we will do, I'm sure that's correct. Actually, all of that looks correct. Let's, computed may not, yeah, that's fine. I don't care. Let's give it a moment to find the solution here. Good time for any questions if there are any. I swear it had one. What the heck?
Remember to add a question. All you need to do is type colon or quote, colon, question, end quote. And if you've got any questions for Adam, go ahead and type it in.
So this is important to understand, though. If you come up with this very same problem, normally if I use my normal way of processing, like when I do WBPP or things like that, part of that pipeline is to do the astrometric solution. But in this case, I don't know what I did. I lost my little solution. So it did figure it out here, and it's just doing its thing, but I saw that it came up with a solution. So it'll write the solution to the file, and then I can press the cool button for SPCC here. I have it so it does the extra distortion correction stuff. So that takes another few seconds here.
Adam,
Yeah.
Josh wants to know if it's okay if he puts samples on dark nebula.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. But the distinction is, even in the dark nebula, there could still be what I'm calling enough signal that you wouldn't want to put a sample there. The discrimination is this useful information or not? Is it really, really faint and noisy kind of information? That's going to be the sampling the sky. It's really the sky that you want, or what we're going to call the sky. So I wouldn't put a sample right here. You could, but I do know that even in the dark nebulosity here, there's the signal is elevated compared to other regions that are not in the middle of the nebula. So it's probably safer to use something closer to the sky. But in general, yeah, I think that's the right idea. So, yeah, go ahead.
And John wants to know, is NSG, is that used before image integration? That should help with the gradient.
So that's a different question outside of what I'm doing now. That's a kind of a normalization and weighting question. NSG as a normalization tool does not get rid of gradients. What it does is, through the process of normalization, it matches gradients, which can make it easier or better. Because if you have an image that has minimized gradients, you can use that to match all your other images, and therefore make it easier to remove gradients later. So that's the full statement of why you know, a tool like NSG can do some pretty cool things. That's also true, by the way, for the normalization that's done in PixInsight. It has its own normalization process, local normalization, which does a similar kind of job. So they don't take care of gradients such as what I'm just showing in DBE, but they can help in the sense that through normalization, you minimize the kind of additive gradients that you're going to create when you integrate all the images together.
Okay, going back to John's question, it sounds to me like it would something you would like to do before you integrate.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's normalization is a part, is what you do immediately before image integration. That is true.
Okay, thank you.
That is true.
We're clear
Okay.
now.
Yep. So I'm going to run SPCC now, and now it won't complain. I have an astrometric solution. Maybe I like sabotage myself, and I thought I should show this to people. Maybe that's what it is. And I forgot that I did it, so I end up being surprised at myself. I don't know. Insufficient data. What's wrong? I didn't stretch the image, did I? Let's see. What did I do wrong? I don't know what I did wrong. It says insufficient data. Did I don't know what I'm doing wrong. It's either I wasn't operating on the correct image, or the image has no. What image did I just do? Oh my God. I don't know. Apparently I didn't do it to the active image. That's dumb. I don't know what I must have just done it on another image. Probably the grayscale image. Let's see how dumb I am. Nope, I don't even know what image I did it on. Okay. So do it again. Go to script, image analysis, image solver. I do have this one active right now, so looks like it's doing everything, right? Yep, see, there's the answer. It's going through it. Okay, I'm going to verify because I'm make sure. So I go to the header. Yes, it's there. Good. And then we do this thing again. I didn't like stretch the image or something goofy, did I? Oh, that's a good sign. Great. I don't know what I did. Yeah, I'll watch the recording later and figure it out. Good. Now we have a stretched image. Okay, so I will, I can see that, you know, it made a nice fit with the lines and everything else looks normal there. We do get an adjustment when we do the background neutralization, so we can just go ahead and now we should be able to link the channels and produce what is a color calibrated image. Moments ago, it looked all green and weird, but now we have something that really looks quite nice. We can see the different colors of the stars. We can see the, you know, we have a blue star here, we have yellow stars. We can see the beginnings of color of the nebula with red and blue, a reflection type nebula here. You can even tell that this red here is different than this kind of more magenta pink coloration that is here. So all of that looks great. And we can then say, if this is where we are with this data is still linear, it has not been stretched. Ultimately, what we want to do is say, okay, let's now permanently stretch this image. And that's where the decision needs to be made, because we will write in stone here just by stretching it. Now, all this is the auto stretch button that I'm showing right here on the screen. It's not necessarily the best stretch. So to understand what this is about, what the stretching is that's being done with the STF, and those are the values that we put into histogram transformation, we actually need to know what the formula is. Literally, what is this thing doing? And that's not something that is often talked about or discussed. And it is mentioned, though, in the documentation itself. So I'd like to show that to you just so you can see there is literally a function. Before, when I was moving the midtones value, the midtone slider, and I said that when we move it to the left, we're putting many more grayscales, the bottom 50% of all those grayscales, in a much smaller space. That is a non-linear representation of the information, because we're putting more grayscales in one part of the value space, the brightness levels, than we are in the other part. And there's a function for that. In this case, this is the function right here, function number 1. This function is, if you plug in see the M, if you plug in that M value, that's the midtones value, you're going to get the output brightness level that will be the function of this nonlinear function for this behavior. So let me go back to PixInsight here and actually show you what that function looks like. Here, this is what the curves, I'll zoom out a little there. These are what the curves actually look like. So if you just take an image and then you adjust to a midtone, you move the midtone slider halfway to the left, that's 0.25, because it sits at 0.5, right? And then you move it to 0.25, what you're going to get is a curve that looks like this blue one. Whenever we see, like in histogram transformation, I'll just show that to you really quickly, you'll notice that there's this diagonal line. That's actually the transfer function. But the diagonal line is specifying that for a given input value, the output value is exactly the same. It's a diagonal line. It would be 45 degrees. It doesn't appear like it's 45 degrees here, and it's just because the aspect ratio of the tool is not square. But if you actually made it a square, it'll be a true 45-degree angle. That's also true here in my picture. You can see the little dotted line. That's for a given input, 0.4. The output is 0.4. You know, 0.5, 0.5, and so on, that line. So here with the blue line, now we have a different input and output. It basically says that it's going to always be a brighter pixel, but it'll be much brighter as you're in the kind of that middle gray region. And then things don't get as bright. It's still a brighter pixel, but they are not brighter by that same proportion as the middle. And you get more and more curved responses until you get something like the black line here, where you have a very sharp rise, and then everything looks level across the top. Do you remember how I said that the sky value of the nebula was 0.005? And that's basically what the automatic stretch function determined for the, the midtones level is somewhere near there. It's not there. The black level is actually pretty close to there. But now you can see how much of a stretch that auto stretch is doing to the image. It's this curve, because all the values that are very, very close to 0 have to be bumped up tremendously. And then once you get above a certain point, all the other values look to be about the same brightness. That's all the stars and stuff that's represented in the image. So the nebula exists all in this region right over here near the left side, of course, of this graph. And that's what we're trying to brighten up. And then everything else kind of levels off here. So one of the things that I found interesting in doing this research about, I made a little Excel thing that plotted these cool little curves. This is the only math, but I'm not going to actually show you numbers. It's literally the shape of the curves that matter. But one of the interesting things is that people often think that this tool, the STF tool or other things like it, when you manipulate the midtone slider, is a gamma stretch. It's not. One of the cool things is that's what actually Photoshop uses, and it's not the same function. Now, I don't know if people know this or not, but I'm just going to bring up a quick image here in Photoshop and just show you that it is literally a different function. And so if you're using Photoshop, for example, to stretch an image, it could be anything you want. I'm hoping some image here will show up. Let's see. Open recent. Oh yeah, there. Let's open up a JPEG, whatever. Let me just do a JPEG. And then if you go to, boy, I'm going faster than my machine here. Come on, machine. If we go to, I don't know. Oh, I need to be on the background. I see this thing has text. If we go to levels here, like this, you have a middle slider, and that, of course, changes things. Well, you'll notice that the middle slider here starts at 1 because it's a gamma function, not the MTF function that's used in PixInsight. They're different functions. So it's actually literally a different equation. And as you lower this gamma number is the input to that equation, and then the output is what we're seeing here on the screen for the stretch. So I just wanted to point out that what's in PixInsight is not actually a gamma stretch. Gamma curves, I do have those as well. Let me see if I can get to it here. There we go. This is what the gamma curves look like. They look very similar, though, to the MTF curves, but they're not quite the same. It's literally not the same function. So for fun, what I did is I compare a couple of curves. Here is a curve that's roughly the same when you have a gamma of 2 that's very similar to this 0.25 setting for what you have in PixInsight, and you can see the slight difference in the curves. But when you have a very, very initial big stretch, which is what we need to do when we're stretching our images, you'll notice that the two curves are actually very similar to one another. The gamma curve and the MTF curve, they're similar up to a point. And then, of course, they have kind of a different break and a different behavior at the very top end. But that should give you a sense of the different ways in which images can be stretched in terms of a function. And that, at some level, does have some impact on the images that, the choices that we're going to make when we stretch the images. So let me show you, for example, that the shape of these input-output curves really do have an interesting and important effect. So I'm going to talk more about the shape of the curves and less about numbers. Ultimately, the whole reason I'm discussing this is we need to decide how to permanently stretch this image. But we need to understand the actual shape of these input-output curves, like I just demonstrated for the MTF, that was one. But there are more even specific curves that you can, anytime you see them, you know what they're doing to an image. The MTF curve is one kind of curve, but there are many other very simple curves. And I'd like to show you one here with actually curves transformation. So I've brought up a nice tool, and this is a great way if you ever want to demonstrate, reset this here. If you ever want to demonstrate something about the stretching of images and how it interacts with an image, if you just bring up grayscale tablets like this, it really, I find it to be very informative in terms of understanding what's going on. So this is actually the information here of these images. You can see the individual lines here. And right now we have that diagonal line because nothing is happening. But what I want to show you is that we can create a situation where we can black clip by moving the little slider here. I mean, this is sometimes kind of hard to grab here, but I'd love to be able to grab it here. Let's see if I can do it. I'm going to use the real-time preview so we can see it actually happening on the image as I make the adjustment here. It'd probably help me if I do that. Yeah, I can almost grab it. Let me see if I can grab it. I can't quite get it. Oh, let's see. So I can move it up and down, which is really nice. We can also go like this. What I'm doing is I am black clipping the data. I am saying that the information that all the way up to this point, whatever this brightness level is, and it tells me what it is here, almost 0.2, I'm saying that everything beneath that is going to be absolutely black on the screen. And then I will also take the, some level up here and do the same thing. And I'll say that everything above this point right here will be exactly white on the screen because this is the number 1 here. And these are values of 0 down here. And then we have all of our other grayscales in between. Now the slope of the line has changed. That's the key, the slope of the line. A moment ago, we had a 45 diagonal line, which does nothing. If you actually had a vertical line, as you saw, near vertical line, as you saw in the MTF, that brightens up any pixel within that regime. Here, we have a line that's actually a little bit higher. It has a greater slope. And look what it's doing to the image. Where we're not clipping the data, it's now easier to see the distinguishing grayscales between, at each step, if you will, between those 2 points. So here it is before, if I reset it, now the contrast from one step to the other is not as great, right? So the point is that anytime you see that particular shape, sorry, I've got to put it back in the linear representation. Anytime you see this particular shape of this kind of linear thing here, you know that it's a contrast increasing shape. You know that a vertical line is a very big brightening tool as well. But if you decrease values on either side of a highly sloped line, you've got something that's going to increase the contrast. No numbers involved, just look at the shape. Let me just also point out while I am on this screen that if you did do something like I tried to do a moment ago, where we raise the this thing up here, what I'm saying is that all values in the image have to start at some particular value. Instead of starting at 0, they all start at this thing, which is 0.25 or whatever. And you'll notice that the image now has a bias of, a gray value of added 0.25 basically to every pixel. You know why that's useful? That's great for constructing masks. If you ever wanted to have all values be at something and then you want, whatever the object is to be something else, this is how you do it. It's a great mask trick that I demonstrate all the time. So that shape, as well as many other shapes, are super important for understanding, just by looking at these functions, how an image will be stretched. And this is going to lead me to the next thing I want to show, which is a tool which literally takes that idea and puts it in a GUI form to visualize the shape of these functions, tells you what's going to go on with an image and how you might want to stretch it. It is part of this. when we use histogram transformation, we're using that MTF curve. You can see the curve in the sense that when I transfer, let me just go ahead and do this. When I transfer these values down here, like this, let me see if I can do this correctly. Hang on a second. Let me reset this track, whatever. Yeah, but I want this image here. That's the image I want. And I'd like you to show me, here, show me one of these channels. Doesn't matter which one. Let's press the button. Let's transfer this down here. I don't know. Let me just show you then on the grayscale image. Like this. Now you can see the actual function here. And it's that same MTF function that I showed a moment ago in my graph, in my plot. It's just hard to visualize because it's just so far over here on the left side, right? That it's all crunched up towards the left and you don't get to see the whole of the curve. And that's kind of one of the interesting things about this new tool, GHS. It will allow us to better visualize what's going on. So it's a great learning tool in that sense. Let me go ahead and get GHS out here. So here is GHS. Now I'm going to, for the moment, not track an image because I just like to show you a quick tour of this tool as well as interact with it on an image, but first just without doing that. So it might be a good idea to zoom in for a moment just to this tool so I can talk about it and the shape of some things in general. I guess I do need to click on an image here, so I will click on this image. It's going to populate this information here, but you can kind of ignore that information if you'd like for a moment. Oh, I guess I changed the size. Sorry about that. So the way this tool works is that we have the values of the image, and we're going to be able to represent them here with respect to some input-output curve. The red line is, again, that diagonal line, which means it will have no effect on the image. But whenever we do the real-time preview of some image, we'll be able, sorry, I'm moving it again, we'll be able to make an adjustment and see how this curve affects the image. I guess I will track here. I will track, but I am not going to show the graph. Let me see if I can do that. How do I not show the graph? I can not show the graph because show the curve. Yeah, I want to show the curve. I just don't want to show the, I've forgotten how to do that. Here's the graph. I thought we could not show it, but I guess we'll show it. So this is the current representation of my cool little grayscale tablet over here. And what happens is we have a stretch factor. We have a local intensity, which I'll explain in a moment because it comes from what I was just talking about. We have a symmetry point, and then we have these shadows and highlights. So those are the parameters that you basically want to pay attention to. We also have a transformation type here, and the midtone transfer is one of the options. So we can get exactly the same stretch if we select this one that we can when we use histogram transformation or the STF in combination with histogram transformation. There's also a linear thing, which is you can just do as I just showed by adjusting the white point and the black point only of the image. But the generalized hyperbolic stretch, this is the one where we can basically have any of these curves. So the MTF curve, a gamma curve, those functions are just one family of curves, whereas we can kind of generalize it and make this any kind of wonky shape that we want for an input-output curve. And that allows us a lot of freedom, but it also means that understanding how to use the tool effectively is kind of a little bit of a skill. So let me demonstrate that by showing that I'm going to go ahead and put it in the linear mode here, like this, and you'll see that now all we have is a white point and a black point to kind of work with here. A moment ago, do you remember that I made that? Let's adjust the black point here. See how I've brought this up? So that's the black point caret, just as you would expect. And then if I bring my white point caret down, I can either drag it here, or I can maneuver or adjust the slider here. It's the same thing. That slider adjusts this caret. So this is the white point caret. This is the black point caret. And now I have exactly the situation I did a moment ago, showing white on one side, black on the other, and showing the same curve. This is an increase of contrast curve. But let me go back and now put it in the generalized hyperbolic form. And now we can make a stretch that has a different kind of result. So let's just do a very gentle stretch. I don't know, something like that. So we have a nice little bow-shaped curve here. This is going to brighten. You can see on the left side, the dark values have become a little bit brighter. In the middle, brighter still. And at the top end, they're bright, but they don't become bright as quickly, but they're more difficult to distinguish here, because you'll notice that this bends back over towards the right. So one of the interesting things about GHS that is not found in, other tools is that not only can we stretch the image and make a curve like this, but we can choose an inflection point in the curve. And this is why the shape of the curve matters. A moment ago, I showed you the diagonal line. We can literally put something like diagonal lines in this image. So I'm going to choose a point to inflect on here, and I'll just make it 0.5. So the symmetry point is what I'm calling the inflection point. It has its own caret, actually. Let me just show you that. Do you see how there's another caret here? It was over here on the left. When I move this slider, you can now see that we have another caret that comes out. And what you'll see it doing is that it is adjusting the shape of this, this input-output curve. It might be hard to see. If you're not already zoomed out, guys, let's zoom back out, because now we'll need to see this with respect to the full frame here. What I want to demonstrate is that if you increase this particular parameter here called local intensity, it increases the slope of that line. Let me show you that. See how I am making the slope of that line much, much greater? And you already know what a line does. The line, in this case, it has a slope here, and then it has a gentle curve in one direction and a gentle curve in another. It's still a contrast enhancement, but we get to determine the slope of the line. We can say how much that contrast is. So step one is we make a stretch. Step two is that if we want there to be contrast at a particular place in the image, and it doesn't need to be at 50% gray, watch what happens when I move this to the left. You can see it moves that region of contrast to the left here in my grayscale tablet. Again, if I move my that symmetry point or inflection point to the right, it's moving where that appears in the right. But also notice that this curve now goes downward, which means we're making all these values less bright. So there are two more important fields here. There's a protection of the shadows and a protection of the highlights. So if we wanted most of our contrast to appear here, but we don't want to affect as much the shadows or the highlights, we can watch what happens to the curve. We can adjust that so that we are bringing this back up to something that is closer to that 45-degree angle. That means it'll have less of an effect. And the same thing you can do with the highlights here. And now we're applying contrast in a region that is much more focused. And then maybe we do a greater local intensity. There's the maximum local intensity, and we protect as much as we can here. And we, again, with the highlights, we protect as much as we can. But now as I move this around in between that region, you can see the shift of where the contrast is being applied. That's how you use GHS, basically, is that we're going to stretch an image. We're going to determine where the local contrast is that we're interested in. First stretch, there really isn't much of a local contrast. We're just trying to stretch the image because we want the brightness levels of the image to fill the histogram space, the full space of brightness levels that we can work with. Then you can do more focused kinds of adjustments with the data. So that's the basic idea behind using GHS here. It doesn't look all that great when I'm using this grayscale tablet, but I think this is really instructional to show. You can see the shift in the position of where contrast is being applied. So let's go actually to a real image now to stretch. I'm going to close the real-time preview. I'll minimize this for a moment. And you know what I brought along with me here, let's reset this because I don't want to show you a mess, is first a grayscale image of M51, and then I'd like to show you a stretch of M42. Those are the two last things I'd like to do here tonight, demonstrating GHS, but also demonstrating, of course, how stretching can be accomplished with GHS, but thinking about the shapes of curves, thinking about what you want to do with the image with respect to the process that you're using and the decisions that you need to make. If I stretch this image with an auto STF, I just did Control A on the keyboard, which is the same as pressing the little nuclear button here. I get what looks like an overexposed image of M51. This would not be a useful stretch. Now, if I come in here and I, manipulate this in the appropriate way, I can perhaps find some stretch, which is kind of good. But one of the things is that using just the MTF stretch alone, without being able to manipulate the curve as I've shown, just doesn't allow you some of that extra flexibility. So GHS kind of gives us a little more access to some other parts of being able to stretch. So let's do that here by using GHS. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the stretch because I'm going to use the real-time preview. So I'm going to turn off the stretch of M51. And what we'll do is, and let's reset this, we're going to work with the generalized hyperbolic stretch because that's what gives us these nice curves. And then we'll approach this by stretching the image just as I demonstrated a moment ago. So that's kind of step one, stretch the image. So here we are, we're stretching the image, and I need to turn on the real-time preview. There we go. So here we are stretching the image, and you can see that we're able to see or visualize the data in some form here. Let me be sure that I have everything reset. Yes, I do. So yeah, so there it is. There's the stretch, right? The initial stretch is going to need to be some very, very large value. In fact, let me dive into the GHS a little bit. You can't even see, right now I am displaying the histogram, but it's so far over here to the left, you can't even see it. What you can do is zoom in, and now I can see the histogram way over here on the left. Notice how the bar changes its value. The bar at the bottom, when we were at the zoomed out mode here, you can now see the full grayscale going from white to black. But when we zoom in, now we have just black here. But that's because we're just zoomed in to the very left side. I mean, what are these values? If you click on the screen, you can actually probably show what some of the values are. These are sky values. This yellow line just represents the value either in the histogram or if you're getting it from the image, the value at that image, whatever that value is that you clicked on. So I can make the yellow disappear here. If I click right on the galaxy, it's actually here, but I have to zoom out to see it because that value, probably some bright part of the galaxy, is not in this little window. I'd have to zoom out to be able to, yeah, there it is, to be able to see it at all. But that's not the cool part. The cool part is over here with the histogram itself. So for the initial stretch of an image, you already know that we have to have some huge stretching factor to do anything of interest. We can choose to have one of these local intensity points if we want it. It's not ultimately necessary, but it can help with the background and making it kind of a contrast between where we're stretching. So oftentimes what people will say is that you want to do it right about wherever the sky value is. So you pick that. I can send that here to this field, or I could have moved my little caret here. That's doing exactly the same thing as specifying the value right here. And then you're gonna, you're gonna choose some stretch. So we choose some stretch, and again, we'll see the image getting brighter. But here is one of the coolest things about GHS, is that when you do have a local intensity and you pick some value, it's going to bring down, do you notice how this is now coming down? I'm going to zoom out to show this to you. See the curve here? When I change my local intensity, normally like with the MTF, it's just pegged all the way to the top. If we were just using that function, we're not using that function right now, but if we did, it would be pegged to the top and that's it. But in GHS, by changing this local intensity, by making a little bit of a slope over there by some inflection point, notice how this comes down. And what that means is that these values at the top end are no longer being seemingly all white clipped. And that's a feature of modifying these curves. That modification allows you to choose a much greater, a better choice really for stretching the images. So how much are we going to stretch this image? Well, I don't know. Maybe we'll go somewhere, I'll just pick a point. We'll go somewhere around here. And what kind of inflection point do we want? I mean, this could be a fine inflection point right there. And so the local intensity then, maybe we'll have it, let's go somewhere around here. I mean, that looks pretty good. That doesn't look terrible, right? So now we have an image of M51. I can see if we zoom in here. Let's zoom in with, hold on, where's my, with this guy. No, it's down here. There we go. We can see, the detail here in the center of the galaxy, and we can see all the interesting stuff. So remember, this is the real-time preview. The actual image is right here. I'm just going to press the little square button to apply it. Now this one gets blown out because it's applying this same old stretch to the newly stretched image. So the stretched image is now behind it. There it is. But I will just reset GHS. And now we can continue to work in GHS. So step one is to do the initial stretch. And then step two is that, as I demonstrated before, we can apply contrast to a part of the image where we might want it to be. So in this particular case, we might want contrast to be in the disk of the galaxy. Right now, the galaxy has a relatively uniform brightness across the disk. But it might be nice to show more contrast between the spiral arms of the galaxy and the intra-spiral arms and some of the smaller features of the galaxy itself. So what we would first do is we now show up here, by the way, a histogram of information where now the useful information is extended across more grayscales, right? I can see more information all the way up to mid-gray values. So we're going to choose a point here that we want the contrast to appear. Well, where is that? Well, I'm going to click here on the disk of the galaxy, basically, in between the spiral arms. So this would be the point. This is the value that I would want that contrast, that separation where brightness and on one direction and darkening on the other to occur. So maybe this will be our point. And then what we're going to do is specify, first we want to kind of stretch the image a little bit. So, we do a little bit of a stretch. And then where do we want this to be ultimately? Well, let's just say, for example, that our intensity here, so our, I need to send this point to SP because I didn't send it. There we go. So this is our inflection point, and here is our stretch. And so our stretch is, somewhere around here. So then what we can do is we could change this point, and you can see how it's affecting the contrast that we're getting here. Now, the fact that we're not seeing the background, it's okay. Hang on, we have another adjustment for that. But just for the moment, notice the spiral arms. It's the spiral arms that interest us here. So let's zoom in. Here's before and after, and I think you'll agree that we are adding good contrast to this part of the image. So let's say we want a greater contrast effect here. So we can raise this. I mean, we might even go as crazy as something like 2 point something or whatever. Now we have a lot of contrast going there. And I'm going to go for this greater contrast only because, you know, I might want to still moderate the other end. So now I'm going to zoom back out. I didn't do that well. I think it's this button. There we are. And I want the background to still be protected. So all I do is I protect the background by bending this up like this. In that way, I can now show. You want to be a little careful though, because you don't want the highlights to go crazy either. You can probably adjust and protect the highlights a little bit, and then just get the contrast that we want here. So maybe we do a value like, I don't know, 0.44, something like that. And then we do, yeah, you know, something like this. So we have our contrast. We still don't have maybe as much of the title tails that we want, but now we have the contrast showing up in the galaxy where we want it to be. Here is before and here is after. We've definitely improved that element of things. So I will go ahead and do this. And then the final stretch, let's reset this, is that we want to show more of the that background, the title tails. So now we just do a normal kind of stretch. We stretch it maybe, I mean, you can go crazy with this kind of stretch, right? And once again, we still want to choose some kind of inflection point, but like before, this is kind of like a maximum stretch. So we probably want it to be some very small value. So let's choose some value here that we want it to be at. Right? And so let's do an inflection here of something like 2, something like that. I don't know. Like that. So what we want to do is, of course, protect the highlights and not have some crazy thing here. Bring this down. We can bring this. So I don't know how much of the title tails we really want to see here. The local intensity, you can see that it kind of increases that contrast, especially in the central parts. You want to protect the highlights a little bit. But we want to still bring up that background as much as we can. Move this around here. There you go. So you can see I'm making the sky brightness more contrast. It's very probably not coming across on Zoom. Anyway, this is good enough for Zoom purposes. I'm going to say, you know, there we go. That's probably going to be close enough. So we'll go like this, and then like this, and you can go crazy with stretching. But that might be the method of using GHS to stretch an image, using the ideas of contrast enhancement, but also utilizing the protection of shadows and highlights so that you get all parts of the image that you really want to be able to display. This is something you couldn't do with just the native MTF in PixInsight. Now, I think I have probably gone for, how long have I gone for? I'm going to pause and ask if there are any questions. There's only one other.
You're at about an hour and 15 minutes in.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I mean, you do what you need to do to get the ideas across. We did have a question. Mostly, remember the scale gradient image you showed, the 256 levels of gray. And Isaac wanted to know where you got that.
You can just search. You can literally search for grayscales, and it'll give you this image. Yeah.
Yeah. Grayscale gradient is what Josh suggested we search for, and then hit the image button, and you will find it in that pile.
Yeah, you will. Yeah,
So,
it's useful.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So I tell you what. Give me another 10 minutes, and let me do the hard thing in 10 minutes. What I'd like to show you is the hardest thing in the world. And that is to stretch M42, a color image of M42, and accomplish a couple of reasonable things, which is to show that you can make these choices of stretching in such a way that you're able to show both the detail and the color and the brightness kind of all at the same time. And if you can do it with M42, you can do it with anything. you know, that it is I think it's the hardest thing. You will never see anyone do this. Not as far as, or at least I have not seen anyone do this. Use M42 and try to stretch it live or something like that. But I like to demonstrate that. People get really caught up with the idea that you have to do, you know, kind of composite imaging when you're doing M42 and other similar kind of bright objects, the, you know, M31 and other things. I don't think that's true. I really don't. And a tool like GHS and other perhaps methods, and this is not the only one, in Stretch Academy, I show other paths. This is just one of many paths to stretching images. There's another path, for example, where you can use a combination of the MTF plus HDRMT in PixInsight to stretch something like M42. But since I'm here with GHS, I'd like to demonstrate this really quickly. So with the, you know, the kind of ideas that I've just shown, let me go ahead and use GHS to do the initial stretch of the data. You'll notice that here it's all squished over here to the left side, just as we expect. So I've zoomed in so you can see that there is indeed a histogram. And what we want to do is, of course, choose some reasonable point to be our, you know, our initial symmetry point. And that's only because we want to say that the contrast between where the object stuff is in the sky, we want to be able to control that. That's all. Otherwise, everything just gets bright because it starts at 0. So we're going to pick some symmetry point here to be our kind of contrast just for the sky. And then we do our big stretch. So let's try, I'm going to put it closer to this point right here. You know, maybe 0.07, 0.0007. This point is just to the left edge here. Then we do a stretch. So how much are we going to stretch this thing? Oh, I don't know. We're going to go crazy with the stretch. Now, the resulting histogram is way off the screen there. But with the real-time preview on, we can see what we're doing. Oh, my goodness. Sorry about that. Let me show you from no stretch. There's no stretch. So now I'm stretching the image. And with the real-time preview on, you can see we're going to get something, you know, that looks like this. So when we do see something that looks like this, we know that it's, you know, too crazy bright here, but we also know that by changing this local intensity and the slope of that line, we can change the contrast at that point, which is going to affect the brightness, especially at the top end, because we're bringing this curve down. So now you can start to see here, I can see the trapezium stars right there in the heart of the nebula, right? Which is very, very cool. So we need to pick, you know, some reasonable value there. And that looks pretty good to me. I think that that might be just a good place to start. The sky doesn't need to be overly dark yet. We don't need to do anything. But I do have one suggestion. You'll notice the sky is a little bit bright. One of the things that can help, I'll go ahead and do this now. I'm going to reset this. One thing that can help is that if you have a large pedestal between where your histogram is and like where where 0 is, you know, because the sky is actually much brighter than 0. One of the things that you can do is just go ahead and put it in the linear mode and just raise the black level. And if you raise the, am I doing that right? Oh, because I'm not showing the resulting histogram. Now I really have confused. Show pre-stretch. I want to show post-stretch. Reject, plot histogram on log scale. No. Show pre-stretch. What am I doing wrong? Hang on. Let me see what I'm doing wrong. I don't see it yet. I'll understand in a moment. Let me zoom out, see what the heck I'm doing here. Let me reset, go to linear. Let's zoom in so I can see. There's my histogram. If I change my black level, thank you. I don't know what, I was doing black clip instead of black level. I don't know. So you move this, you increase the black level, move the histogram to the left. Don't leave as much space. You want to leave some space, but don't leave at that much. And then it'll make it easier to stretch. So this is often one of the first things you do. I don't even need to see the image, and I'm not really seeing anything change here. I'm just taking out that extra bit of information. So I'll just go ahead and do that. Now I can do the stretching that I wanted to do, which is what I was showing you a moment ago. Let's go ahead and do some, what did I say? I put it here somewhere for the inflection point, right? So we do that. Let's make it, so I don't know, let's zoom in so we can see this a little bit more. There we go. So that inflection point we'll put right at the, I'll understand in a moment. Let's see where it is. Yeah, I'm not sure I understand why I'm not seeing it move, but I'll figure it out in a moment. Is it because I don't have the real? No, I have the real screen thing going on here. Let's go ahead and increase this to 6.8. And we can increase this again. What do we have it at, like 2.5 or something? And I wanted the, there's the, where that slider went. Amazing. There it is. There's my little carrot. I don't know why I couldn't get it to come on. Okay. See my little carrot? I was trying to find it. So there's my inflection point, and you know, maybe what did I don't know what I had it at a moment ago, but it's probably somewhere. It'll be a different value now. So, you know, maybe we'll just put it somewhere around here. And we'll call that good. So we've stretched the image. Reset this. So the second stretch is going to be the one where we start to worry about, you know, the contrast of things. So what you'll see is that we have now filled the histogram space with the image. We have all kinds of brightness levels here. So we don't need to go crazy bright now with you know, a stretch. We can just do a very little stretch, but we want to choose where that, you know, where that contrast should be. And I'm going to argue it's going to be, you know, somewhere in this regime. So if I click on the image, what does that give me for a brightness level here? And it shows me, you know, something like there. So what's this? Something like there. So this value is a little bit greater than 0.5 or so. So perhaps we choose something in that regime for our inflection point. 0.6, 0.5, what is this point? We'll go somewhere around here, I guess. And then for this local intensity, we get to increase the contrast of this region. So let me zoom in and show you that happening here. There we go. So here's the symmetry point adjustment for that region. You can see how we're able to better perceive, depending upon how I move this around, some of the structure. Here's the initial stretch, right? Some of that structure of the inner part of the nebula. That's all that I'm doing when I make that adjustment here. And I don't know what's best, so we'll go with that. Let's do something. I don't want to go too crazy here, so let's just do something like 2. Yeah, let's do that. There we go. And we will go ahead and send this on its way, like that. And once again, now we have that kind of situation where the background is quite dark and all of that. So we can make, you know, further adjustments here. Let's reset this and to make further adjustments where we're going to try to work on this top end. We'll worry about the background brightness here in a moment. It's just the brightness of the very center, and that's always the hardest part of working with this. So that brightness is super, super bright. It might be up here. This is, again, where we want to apply that extra contrast. So what we can do is specify that particular position here. And I don't know what I've clicked on. Let me see what it is. Yeah, somewhere in that neighborhood. And then adjust our inflection. But one of the cool things you can do is that you can go the other way with the local intensity. You can actually bend it in a direction that is opposite to the sense of what we were doing a moment ago. So let's make a little bit of a stretch like this. So you can see that we can go in either direction here. See how we get a negative number? And that's okay, because what we're trying to do, and again, I'll zoom in and show it to you, is we can adjust that contrast that's going on right there in the center. So if we went down like in this direction, and then we have a stretch that's something like, I don't know, somewhere around here, something like that, with, let's move the symmetry point. Oh yeah, I think that's actually right. The point is that we can now show the color and the detail showing up here within the nebula. And I think we've gotten all the contrast that we can get out of this very center. You can see we're making things dark here. If we wanted to protect anything, we still could. I don't think it's necessary, because the last stretch that we'll do is to try to just take care of the background and make that a little bit brighter. So we can now see what's going on in the center of the nebula. So the last stretch is just to take care of the background. And once again, we'll do some kind of stretch. Now you can see a lot of nebulosity. So we're just be very gentle about this. 1.48, 1.5, yeah, sure. And then we're going to put this way up here for our inflections. You know what's another cool trick here is that you don't even need to use, if you don't want to, you can just use the midtone transfer. I just want to point this out. You can use GHS, but with the midtone transfer, all you have to do is not even worry about an inflection point. Instead, you can just operate on a stretch as well as protecting the shadows and the highlights if you want. So by doing this, for example, you can do some kind of stretch, which I'll make it, I don't know, something here, right? And then you can just protect the shadows like this. I'm not protecting anything. Let's see. Am I dragging this the wrong way, or am I just not dragging it at all? Let's see. Oh, I think I need to actually put need to put that symmetry point up there, so it'll do something for me. There we go. So I put my symmetry point way up the high. And then shadows go like this. This is just going to increase the contrast of the center of the nebula, something along these lines. I want to try this again, though. Let me just try this stretch again. So we want something like 2.5. And we want something like this was the stretch I was going for. This is the one I wanted to show you guys. And we'll bring down the highlights. Ah, there we go. Starting to get there. So what have I got here? I've got an image that is stretched with, there we go. An image that's stretched that's going to ultimately be able to show us, the inner part of the nebula as well as the outer features. Let me go ahead and apply this and then reset and show you. I'm going to get out of the screen view here and show you the GHS result here. Oop, here it is. The GHS result is not that one. I mean, that's nice, but it is the following thing. I will show you, because apparently one of the things that I didn't do live very well, here's the first stretch, here's the second stretch, here's the third stretch, fourth stretch, and the fifth stretch. was to get you to this point. I think I messed up one of the sections there. And what I wanted to show you is that you can, once you have stretched it in the way in which I was demonstrating, you're able to see the inner structure as well as the colors of the nebula. And then you can do the, the rest of the kind of adjustments that you would want to do. Very typical things are to, increase the color saturation for the object. So you would just do curves transformation, which is here. You could increase the color saturation, maybe do this a little bit. That will help. Yeah, it's quite a bit. That should come across on. And then you could even do things like this, which will increase the contrast of all of those features. So that was the idea. Ultimately, you would end up with a final result of the stretched image, which allows you to get from this point to being able to use other tools to stretch the image further. And that's kind of the main point behind a tool like GHS or even just the regular MTF, is you want to make those adjustments, not because you're going to make it the final version of the image, but you want to leave yourself in a position where you can move forward from there and then make the adjustments that you want. So with that, I'm gonna call this a night here. I'll stop this, for example, and ask if there are any questions about anything so far.
Alex?
Adam, we did have a question from Isaac. You've shown us a lot about stretching tonight. There's already a bunch of stretching processes in PixInsight: local histogram equalization, HDRMR, multi-scale transform, dark structure, enhance. How do all those things work with what you showed us tonight? How do local stretching methods work with this?
Well, so yeah, that's one of the things I couldn't show, is that there are all of these different paths, and you can use these different paths to make a choice between one or the other. That's what I show in Stretch Academy. So for example, the stretching that I just tried to do in GHS to get to this result right here is one way to do it, but there is actually perhaps a shorter way to get to the same point, and that is to use the combination of just MTF with HDR-MT. So GHS allows you to do certain kinds of things very easily and quickly, but other things, while you can do it in GHS, might be more appropriate in other particular paths. So it really depends. And I show, okay, look, you can do this one in this many steps, but you can do this over here with this many steps. And that's another cool thing to be able to show as far as the different ways of stretching. It's not only is one way better than another, but sometimes they both reach kind of equivalent things, but one way might be fewer steps. So that makes it nice as well. So the M42 here is a lot of steps in GHS, but you can manage the contrast, and understanding how to do that is what makes using that tool interesting.
Sounds like a subject for another program.
Of course, yeah. I had some trouble here. I swear my screen was not updating and I don't know what the heck it was. So it really threw me off course there. That is one of the reasons why I made the little stretches, because I knew I did it correctly, but it wasn't updating for me. So I couldn't see what I was doing, and that was driving me a little nuts. So I apologize for the technical difficulties.
It's a live show, Adam.
Yeah, I know. But I do this and I do it straight up correctly in my in my video. So I have a recording of me doing it.
You want to show us a little bit of your site? So just take a couple minutes.
Yeah, that's fine. I can just show you that this is one of the topics that I do. In fact, I make the very data that I was working with available to everyone. I thought about doing that for this program, but I thought that might be too much. So I make the M42 available, and I take you step by step in the proper stretching and explain why you manipulate it the way that I was trying to show there. The same thing is true for M51. Those two examples I actually show, but I also show, the relationship between using starless images, for example. I didn't do that in this case, but oftentimes you're going to want to stretch an image in the starless regime, right? And then you're going to add back the stars, but the stars are going to be stretched to a different level. So I demonstrate, of course, how to do that and then combine everything. There's some interesting topics that deal with narrowband imaging and stretching of images as well. So that's all I would say about this, is that I cover a lot of that information. And this is something I plan on adding to as well. It's not like it's a complete topic. It's something that actually requires a course to really cover all of that area.
You know, the ability to create effective starless images and start and operate on them separately has really become a powerful tool.
Yeah, it is.
Thanks to Russ. I mean, because sometimes there's just no way to manage stars and nebula at the same time.
As an example, this is one of the images that I was demonstrating that with. Here, you can see that I stretched this image, you know, without any stars, and then I have another version of the. Now my stuff is in the way. I have another version of the image with just the stars, but these are stretched to a different degree, and then I blend the two together in order to achieve this. But if you zoom in, you know, they look like they should be there. It's not like it's some weird Frankenstein thing, which is nice. So yeah, that's you're right. That's another very important technique as far as stretching data is concerned.
Okay. Any more questions, Alex, or are we all set?
There are questions. I don't do it if we've got time for them. One was from Isaac. Given the recent developments in astroimaging, are there any stretching related advancements you'd like to see?
Yeah, I do. I think they deal with narrowband stuff. There's some interesting, I think, tools that are going to be starting to come available for narrowband that will allow for mixing, which is a part of stretching data, mixing of the colors in ways that are different than is traditionally done. Making that easier, I think, is one of the areas that will be up and coming and new. I think there's right now, there's already a large set of tools that are in PixInsight for stretching. But in narrowband, the realm of narrowband and mixing color information, there's still some room for innovation. So I think that's one area.
Okay.
You want to stop sharing your screen?
Oh, absolutely, unless you like staring at that. Yeah.
Josh asks, what's the best way to stretch dark nebula? I don't know if you've got time for that, or you prefer to.
Sure. Yeah. The answer is it is another thing that I demonstrate on my site, specifically that. But the answer really is to create a starless image where you do a very aggressive stretch. It does require good data, but you do a very aggressive stretch on the dust and the details that are there, increasing the contrast, and then you put the stars back in, but you don't put the stars in at that same stretch, right? And that there are a couple of tricks of doing that. One of the tricks is using DBE in a very particular way. There's another trick for helping that dust stand out a little bit better. So those are the kinds of things that I show. But ultimately, it is making a starless image and really going to town with stretching it.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Russ. His tools have just changed.
Well, to be clear, I think that even Russ would acknowledge that. What's his name? Nikita, with the StarNet probably started that, but it was hard to do still. So advances like with Russ have made it yet easier to do. But yeah, the moment that you could remove stars from images, that opened up an entire vista of adjustments that you couldn't otherwise do easily, because the stars were always part of the image, and anything you did to the nebula wouldn't necessarily be good for stars, and that was a problem.
And masking just didn't cut it.
Because you couldn't threshold it in a way that made sense. That's what neural nets are. They think more like we do because they're trained by us. Yeah. Exactly.
I think are we all set?
Yeah, we're all set for here.
Well,
questions.
Adam, thank you very much for a fascinating presentation. I think you held your audience pretty much to the end, and if you look on this in a couple of weeks, you probably see a lot of people are looking at it. And hopefully, you know, they come and look at some of the other tutorials that you have on your site.
One of the things that I did previously, I had ran into it. I remember I ran into a technical difficulty when I did the LRGB explanation with you guys. I kind of had one here a bit with M42. So what I'd like to do is I will make available my actual recording of the stretching of M42, so that you can see it in its proper unfolding, because I got lost there and it was not properly unfolding for me. So let me show that to people so they can really see what that looks like.
So we can post that on the site if you'd like to make that available.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think that would be
Okay.
appropriate, because it's really an interesting thing, usage for GHS, and when done properly, you can see that if you can do that, you can apply that logic to any image and it'll work just fine.
Do you want to send that to Patrick? You want to be the repository for that kind of thing and post it? A short. Yeah, I think it can be a nice short.
Yep.
Well, if we're all set, I'd like to thank everyone that hung in here with us to the end. And once again, happy Father's Day, or it's still Father's Day? Yeah, still Father's Day. Still Father's Day here. And we'll see everyone next week, hopefully. We'll see more about gradient illumination with Graxpert, and we'll probably get the correct way to pronounce it at the same time. So for everyone out there, thank you very much and good night, and we'll see you next week.
Good night.
Hey.
Patrick, you want to take us out? Adam, you can hang with us if you want, or if you got to go.